Welcome to A Deeper Dive. Joining us today, so excited, special guest, Senator-elect Carlos Guillermo Smith, an Orlando Democrat who was elected to the Senate without any opposition. He will be joining the upper chamber after the November election. We'll talk about funding for arts and culture, his priorities for the 2025 legislative session. Stick around. You'll learn what Senator-elect Carlos Guillermo Smith and incoming Senate President Ben Albritton have in common. Senator-elect Carlos Guillermo Smith, welcome to the show.
After a devastating 2022 re-election loss, I didn't quit. I did not give up. I did not get discouraged. And now I'm Senator Smith, which I think sends a really powerful message to folks even beyond politics, that they shouldn't give up and they shouldn't be discouraged.
You're listening to Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida. Let's dive in.
So excited to have with me virtually. I guess you're one of my OGs. I don't know. We go to the way back when he was elected in 2016. Carlos Guillermo Smith, I believe you are now the only Democrat who was elected without opposition to the Florida Senate, and you will be taking office after the November election. And so we will call you Senator-elect Carlos Guillermo Smith.
Thank you so much, Dara, for having me. That feels so surreal to hear you say that. Please just call me Carlos, or, what, you can call me Susan. I don't care. I mean, anything goes really with me at this point.
That senator title, it means so much to people who are in the process. You spent 6 years in the state house. Then that's right. I believe your district was redrawn in 2020, and so you were not reelected in 2022. A Republican was elected to that seat. Orlando, we should let people know who don't know you. I don't know who doesn't. I always say we have a very sophisticated audience. The divas are sophisticated, and
we love the divas.
We do love the divas, and now you are one. Well, you already were one, but now you're a deeper dive diva.
This is very, very true. Everyone that knows me knows I'm a classy diva.
Well, I don't know about the classy part for me, but for sure, everybody who knows me knows me as a diva. But so anyway, you were unelected for 2 years. You ran for the Senate. They couldn't recruit anybody to run against you. My understanding is the polls showed that you were so strong that they just, everybody threw up their hands. And so here you are, kind of, is it like, I'm trying to think of what the cliche would be for, coming back from that redrawn district. What's that like?
Sure. Well, again, it's so surreal. I'm so grateful for all of the tremendous community support that we've received in the last couple of years during this Senate campaign. Yeah, I've been running this Senate campaign for over a year. We launched our campaign early in the 2024 cycle. We launched it in April of 2023 on the steps of City Hall. There were hundreds of local supporters who showed up to stand with me when I announced my campaign for a state senate. That included my own Congressman Maxwell Alejandro Frost and some of my former colleagues and good friends.
He's a diva. He was on the show.
He's a diva.
Need to get him back on. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Representative Anavi Escamani, also known as my work wife, was there, along with most of the Orange County Democratic legislative delegation to offer their endorsements on day one. And look, that came after a brutal 2022 election cycle where Republican voters trounced Democratic voters on turnout, where Democrats mostly stayed home in the state of Florida. And after millions of dollars were spent to smear and distort my 6-year record as a member of the Florida House and the House district I previously represented in East Orange County was gerrymandered into a much more challenging seat. We lost our reelection to the House in 2022, but only a couple of months passed before Republicans in both the Senate and the Florida House began weaponizing their supermajority, their newfound supermajority in both chambers, to attack the fundamental rights and freedoms of Floridians. They use their supermajority not to solve real problems, Dara, but instead to ban abortion at 6 weeks, to expand the Don't Say Gay or Trans law all the way to 12th grade, to demonize the transgender community with restrictions on gender affirming care and anti-trans bathroom laws and attacks on drag queens and attacks on immigrants. My goodness, the obsessive nature of this extreme agenda was really felt in Central Florida, particularly in the Orlando-based Senate district that I now am proud to represent. So I stepped forward. I rallied our community and our movement and frankly gave them hope that in Florida we could still elect people who actually cared about people, who wanted to solve problems, and Dara, people who stood for something, standing for and fighting for unifying principles like freedom and equality for every person, regardless of their race, their ability, their zip code, their religion, who they love, their gender or their gender identity. That is what we have been fighting for. And that was a unifying principle that gave folks in my community hope. So yeah, after a devastating 2022 reelection loss, I didn't quit. I did not give up. I did not get discouraged. And now I'm Senator Smith, which I think sends a really powerful message to folks even beyond politics, that they shouldn't give up and they shouldn't be discouraged. And I think that that's really important for all Floridians to hear right now.
You're carrying sort of the mantle of hope for not just the LGBTQ community, but especially resonant for the LGBTQ community. You're gay. You're the first, I believe, Latino gay man to be elected to the Florida House. Now you will be the first. Openly gay is so passé. I don't think that we like who says that anymore. But the first acknowledged gay Hispanic male in the
and proud
Okay, loud and proud.
Obviously that's not a secret. Right. I have been very open and authentic about my identity as an openly gay man, and I think that that's really important.
Is it okay to say
in a
openly
state
gay?
Like Florida?
Is openly gay okay? I feel like it's like why openly? Like I'm not openly cis.
Well, because the opposite would be closeted. Gay.
Okay, all right. But if you're closeted gay, you're not going to be talking about it. Right?
That's still a thing, even in elected politics and in elected service.
No.
Right? So, that's a thing. But I think it's really, really important to acknowledge and celebrate the significance of our election to the Florida Senate for the LGBTQ community in our state, who've been relentlessly attacked and demonized by the majority party in this legislature over the past few years, especially. But the tide is turning in Florida. DeSantis's extreme anti-LGBTQ agenda has been crumbling in the courts. And I expect that as this election cycle progresses through August and through November, we're going to see LGBTQ Democratic representation in Tallahassee expand even beyond my own election to the Florida Senate. It is going to increase, and that's very important because LGBT people must have strong voices of representation in state government, especially at a time where government is being weaponized to attack our existence and our freedoms.
There were some of the bills that you mentioned targeting transgender youth and adults were passed after you left. There were comments made that were quoted in court documents. I'm not going to repeat them, but you know what I'm talking about. The what the court has called animus towards transgender people, striking down some of these restrictions on access to care. What was that like watching? Were you watching from the Florida channel? Were you there in person? I think I just told you, like, I was home in the wheelchair for 3 months of that. So I was watching on the Florida channel. Shout out to the Florida channel. So what was that like to see what was happening and not be able to stand up on the floor and talk about it?
It was heartbreaking to watch some of my former colleagues, Republicans, many of whom I have seen become more and more extreme over the years, people who I believed to be allies in their own ways. It was heartbreaking to see many of them embrace this extreme and baseless rhetoric against the transgender community, really for political purposes. This is part of a bigger picture that we have to understand, which is that years ago, after the marriage equality ruling of the Supreme Court of the United States with Obergefell became the law of the land, and same-sex marriage was a constitutional right in our country, rightfully so, the freedom to marry. The far right needed to go back to the drawing board on finding the anti-LGBTQ culture wars that would resonate or would stick. Because for years and years and years, gay marriage was the culture war boogeyman for the far right. They're like, oh, the gays are getting married. They're coming after our institution of marriage and blah, blah, blah. And over the years, the public rejected those claims and that rhetoric and began to embrace the freedom to marry. And that was across the board. That was bipartisan support across the United States from Republican and Democratic voters who understood why the freedom to marry was so important for same-sex couples. So they have effectively lost that culture war, Dara, and needed to find a new boogeyman. And all the far-right think tanks got together and threw everything at the wall to see what would stick. And what they came back with was, the transgender community is a community that we can exploit for our ongoing culture war. We can't rely on declaring gay marriage to be the boogeyman anymore. No one believes us, and the public has moved away. So the new boogeyman, the new boogie people are going to be trans folks. Most Americans don't know a trans person, and that lack of familiarity with the community can be exploited. And so they've used this issue and weaponized this issue for their own political gain. But the consequences have been disastrous. Many Florida families have made the difficult decision of leaving the state because these laws have become so extreme.
See, it's happening, Divas. This is where he starts answering the questions before I ask them. So I'm sorry, right. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it is a conversation, and interrupting is part of my diva culture. So
I need you to interrupt me because I'm a talker.
I know you are. I love that about you. So, but you were saying how people are leaving the state, and I was going to ask you about that. Are they really? I mean, is it driving folks away? I will tell you that anecdotally, I know one a friend of mine whose daughter is trans, and they moved out of state the day after school ended.
Right. And they're making these heartbreaking and difficult decisions to protect the health and safety of their own families, to protect the health and safety of their own children. Because isn't that fundamentally what parental rights are? It's the rights of parents to direct the upbringing of their children, something that I believed that Republicans were fighting for. Well, not so much when it comes to families who don't agree with DeSantis's extreme agenda. If you don't agree with his agenda of book banning, with his agenda of censorship, with his agenda of attacking LGBTQ families and communities, then he's going to use government to revoke your rights, to revoke the rights of parents to make private medical decisions in consultation with their doctor on how to care for their own children. DeSantis is asserting that he knows best. And so what we've seen is, unfortunately and heartbreakingly so, many LGBT Floridians and families have left the state to protect the health and safety of their families. And it's been heartbreaking to watch. You know, I personally attended going away parties for friends of mine who made that difficult decision. You know, I'm moving to another state because I can no longer safely exist in the state of Florida as a trans person. And we had to say goodbye to those folks that were our friends and our neighbors. But the tide is turning, Dara. This agenda is crumbling in court. You mentioned the ruling from Judge Hinkle that issued a permanent injunction on the state's unconstitutional law that not only restricted access to medically necessary care for trans youth, but also for adults as well. And yeah, they showed their animus in the committee and in the legislative process. They showed through their comments and their extreme rhetoric that they weren't doing this out of any sort of legitimate concern for the health and well-being of children or of adults. They were doing so to register their disapproval of the existence of transgender people and to use government to stop trans people from being able to live their lives as their authentic selves, which of course is not only bigoted, but it serves no public interest for state government to take away those constitutional rights.
Judge Hinkle ruled that it was unconstitutional.
Right. You have a constitutional right to your own beliefs about trans people, but you don't have a constitutional right to discriminate against them.
To take away care that is available to other people, but in the case of the children or the minors, because they're mostly adolescents that I think are affected by this, or I guess tweens also, for the puberty blockers. One of the things that kind of struck me, the rhetoric around this is so loaded. That this judge, this activist, liberal judge, is like endorsing mutilation of children and castration and cutting off their private parts. I think it's important.
So
I think it's important to note that with all due respect, this ruling was limited solely to puberty blockers and hormone therapy for minors. It had nothing to do with surgery. The surgery was not even an issue in this case. So, it feels like disingenuous to be like kind, I think. The people who are
totally
saying this,
disingenuous. The extreme rhetoric continues regardless of the facts and regardless of the truth. And look, just to educate folks, I understand that many people don't know a trans person and they have their beliefs, but through education and through some sort of attempt to understand the trans experience, people learn. Why was it discriminatory for the Florida legislature to pass a law that put up so many restrictions on minors and on adults to seek hormone replacement therapy, which is what trans and non-binary folks often seek. This is hormones. It's hormone therapy taken in consultation with a healthcare professional. Non-trans people, cisgender people, take hormones all the time.
That's what I was starting to say.
For a number of different reasons.
Right.
Both minors and adults.
Yeah.
And they're able to do so under the consultation and supervision of their healthcare provider. So what makes trans people different? If there are side effects for trans folks, which there's side effects with any therapies and any drugs, then those side effects apply whether you're trans or whether you're not trans. You can't limit it for trans people just because they are trans. That's discriminatory. And the state has no business preventing trans people from wanting to live their lives authentically without hurting anyone.
And we will be right back with Senator-elect Carlos Guillermo Smith. Hey Divas, we have enjoyed bringing you podcasts week in and week out for the last almost 100 shows. We're coming up to our 100th show. Can you believe that already? And if you've enjoyed listening, please help us keep the lights on here by subscribing to the show and giving us a rating. We'd love 5 stars, but we won't tell you what to do on your favorite podcast platform. We are back with Senator-elect Carlos Guillermo Smith. I wanted to shift to the election, so you don't have to worry about your election.
I'm not even on the ballot.
You're not even on the ballot.
I was elected to a 4-year term without opposition in the Florida
do I
Senate.
call you senator or senator-elect? Do I need to redo the whole intro?
Well, again, call me Carlos, but the proper protocol to answer your question is I'm senator-elect until November, when the November election night. Technically, we're all elected to our positions on election night. And then, of course, the swearing in that comes a couple weeks later in Tallahassee is really a formality.
Ceremonial,
I will assume the duties of being the state senator for District 17 on election night in November, which I'm really looking forward to, because we have a lot of things that we want to focus on and a lot of priorities that we have, certainly for my Orlando-based district that I now represent, that we want to get to work on right away.
So I want to talk about your priorities. Do you want to start with that, or do you want to start with the hot mess of elections that's going on in Orlando right now that don't involve you? Oh, did I say hot mess? I'm sorry.
I think we can talk about priorities.
Okay,
certainly.
Let's talk about priorities. Let's start with priority. I shouldn't have given you a choice anyways.
Well,
I do want to talk about your priorities for sure. Let's go.
Well, speaking of real problems that need to be solved, just like in other parts of the state, we have a real housing affordability crisis that's happening in the Orlando area. That crisis has multiple factors that are contributing to it: soaring property insurance rates, soaring rents as well, rents that have not only gone out of control, but rents that have unfortunately pushed many families and individuals in Central Florida out onto the streets. The homeless crisis has gotten worse because homelessness is a housing problem. Let's be very clear about that. We have a ever-growing homeless and unsheltered population in the Orlando area, and that has everything to do with the housing crisis. There's so many things that we can do to solve this crisis, whether it be doing everything we can to reform property insurance, to keep costs low for homeowners, and frankly for landlords who pass those property insurance costs and premiums down to renters, but also to stabilize these soaring rents. We can do a lot to diversify the hotel taxes, particularly TDT taxes here in Orange County that account for almost $400 million in county revenue locally. Diversify those TDT taxes to be spent on local needs rather than on corporate advertising and on TV ads for giant theme parks and the tourism industry. We certainly are going to be prioritizing restoring funding for the arts.
See, he did it again twice so far. This is why I love
funding for the arts, raising teacher pay because we're 50th in the nation for teacher pay.
Well, wait, let's talk about funding for the arts first, because you started, but to say in your last year, I have that in my notes, you were led a bipartisan effort, see, I'm reading from my question, in 2022 to 100% fully fund $46 million in culture and museum grants statewide for the first time in a decade. Now, the governor zeroed those funds. I don't think it was quite 40. I forget the amount, but he zeroed that out. What are your thoughts about the impact of that, and what do you hope to do to maybe change his mind on it? And one of the reasons he gave was the Fringe Festival funding. He's shaking his head. Y'all can't see that.
That was an excuse. The governor is scapegoating certain arts groups because he has received tremendous public and bipartisan blowback for his unprecedented job-killing veto of arts and culture grants in the state of Florida. My last year in the Florida House in 2022, to your point, we were able to fully fund at 100% cultural and museum grants in Florida for the first time in nearly a decade. That meant over 500 arts and culture groups across the state of Florida were able to receive critical funding to be able to fuel our local economy, to create jobs, to continue to be a leading attraction and source of entertainment for tourism in our state. Arts and culture is a $4 billion industry in the state of Florida alone. We know, based on the state's own reporting, that for every dollar the state invests in these state arts and culture grants, we get $9 back. That's the rate of return. There's almost no program that you can find, no grant program in the state of Florida that has a 9-to-1 rate of return. That is what these arts and culture grants have as an investment in the state. So for the $26 million that we allegedly saved when the governor vetoed cultural and museum grants for nearly 600 organizations in our state, we have now lost more than $26 million in economic activity and in local and state tax revenue that would have come as a result of those grants, because those grants were not just about the $26 million that were on that line item that the governor vetoed. They were also $26 million that were required for these grantees to also receive matching grants from other entities. Mm-hmm. So the
loss to the organizations was much greater than the direct dollar amount.
Absolutely, which made this job-killing veto so reckless and ignorant. And I don't believe that the governor vetoed arts and culture funding for an ideological reason. I can tell the way that he was going through this budget process, he was willing to veto anything and everything to get to a sum total that he could then brag about on some national stage somewhere to promote himself and say, well, look, I vetoed this much from the budget and I'm so conservative and look at me, I'm so amazing. He didn't do it for any particular reason because he found some of these arts and culture groups to be objectionable. He came up with that excuse after the fact to scapegoat Fringe Fest after he received so much blowback. And by the way, let's think about this. What are these arts and culture grantees supposed to do? Are they supposed to censor their content to placate our supreme leader, Governor Ron DeSantis? We don't censor the art. Are you kidding me? Arts is culture, and authoritarian regimes seek to control culture, which is a very, very dangerous step for the governor to be taking here.
You also mentioned, before I interrupted you on the arts, and thank you for that fulsome answer. And you do have a lot of knowledge about that line item in particular. Teacher pay, that's another priority of we're going through your priorities. Let me just remind you, because
well, look at where we are. Florida's 50th in the nation.
But the governor keeps bragging about how this is like the biggest teacher pay, like they're making more now, or they, I mean, doesn't he keep saying, not bragging, but he keeps that is part of their narrative, is that they
all spin and smoke and mirrors. The reality is that some of the modest investments that have been made in increasing teacher pay over these last several years have been totally insufficient at the decades-long negligence of making sure that we're doing right by our teachers, the decades-long negligence of making sure that we are paying our teachers to do this very, very important job. I would argue the most important job, that we have in the state of Florida. Our teachers, our educators who, are showing the way for our youth, for our future, who are educating our future. Look, 50th in the nation for teacher pay. So much of the reason why we're in this position is because many of the reforms and investments in teacher pay that were made earlier were lopsided towards new teachers and new hires, that they were going to make a minimum salary. Now, that was very important for us to establish a starting salary. But then what about our veteran teachers who have been in the classroom for years and sometimes decades, that are now, making very close to what the starting salary was for other teachers? And then we wonder why we have such a dramatic public school teacher shortage. It's not only because of lack of teacher pay in Florida, it's also because this legislature and this governor have turned our classrooms into political battlefields. That has worsened the public school teacher shortage that we have in the state of Florida. And there's a very easy way that we can solve it. It's actually not rocket science. Pay our teachers better. Stop politicizing our classroom. Make sure that we respect the classroom size amendment to keep classroom sizes manageable. These are very easy reforms that can be enacted if they're a priority for this legislature.
Any other priority? We've seen a lot in the education arena. I don't know what is up, what's coming up. I don't know. Have you heard what potential issues, education-related issues, incoming speaker Danny Perez, we just had him on the show last week, and your new boss, incoming Senate President Ben Albritton. Do we know what their education-related priorities might be?
Well, I think that we're going to see what some of those priorities are, certainly based on what they roll out in the coming months after the November election. But I can tell you what I'm going to be looking for.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be looking to make sure that these voucher dollars and voucher programs, which are totally unaccountable, are reined in. This universal voucher scheme that has been enacted by the legislature has not only drained critical resources out of our public schools, but they're also unaccountable dollars. They're sending hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer money to unaccountable private schools who don't even have to hire certified teachers, don't have to meet any of the same standards as our public schools. And what are we getting for it? What do our students have to show for it? Many of them are not making any of the academic gains that they're expecting to make when their parents enroll them in private schools. Many of them end up back in the public schools within a couple of years. And so I think it's very important as stewards of our taxpayer money that we have strings attached. If private schools are going to accept taxpayer dollars, they need to follow certain standards to make sure our kids are getting a high quality education.
I think it's going to be a little while before we fully see, before we realize the full impact of this, of these major changes to the education Florida public school system, because it's still relatively new. Parents aren't aware so much that they have this, education spending accounts essentially that they can take it. So I think we're going to see there's going to be a lag before we fully realize what the impacts of these changes were.
Absolutely. So on education, we certainly talked about housing, and I've had a particular focus on TDT spending and hotel taxes.
That's tourist development taxes.
Yeah, the tourist development tax is basically the hotel tax that is collected whenever someone stays overnight in a hotel or at an Airbnb.
Bed tax.
And yeah, the bed tax. And in Orange County alone, last year, over $300 million was collected in local bed taxes, but 90 cents of every dollar of those bed taxes that was spent on one of three things in Orange County. Visit Orlando, so basically corporate advertising to encourage tourists to come to Central Florida, which of course we want them to come. It was spent on expanding the Orange County Convention Center. The most recent expansion cost nearly $600 million. For those who don't know, the Orange County Convention Center is one of the largest convention centers of its kind on the planet. It's larger than the Pentagon. It is half empty most of the time, and it employs low-wage workers. And the other bucket of money that the TDT and hotel taxes were spent on was fixing the Amway and improving the Amway Center, which is owned by a multi-million billion-dollar DeVos family. So I don't think that.
So the Amway Center is like where is that a sports thing, or is it?
Right, it's an entertainment arena that's also home to the professional basketball team owned by the billionaire DeVos family. So what I'm saying is, if we're going to be spending 90 cents out of every dollar in hotel taxes on expanding a half-empty convention center that employs low-wage workers, or improving the Amway Center, or paying in corporate advertising for people to come to Central Florida, when are we going to actually spend it on community needs, workforce housing, transportation infrastructure? We want tourism to come to Orlando. Tourism is a great thing. And what comes with increased tourism is also increased community needs. We need more workforce housing. We need more public transportation infrastructure. But right now, state law is so restrictive on how those hotel
Okay, I was just
dollars.
going to ask you, so that's a state law. That's not how the locals decide to allocate those dollars. So you want to
Correct.
have a change to the way that those TDT funds can be allocated.
Yeah, it's about diversifying how bed taxes are allowed to be spent in order to make sure those resources can also be spent to address community needs without increasing taxes even a penny. There was a 2018 law that passed at the request of the tourism industry that basically said that 40% of local TDT taxes must be spent promoting tourism before it can be allowed to be spent on public infrastructure. And that restriction has prevented local governments like mine in Orange County from actually being able to spend bed tax dollars on those community needs that have come as a result of increased tourism. So I talking to you today as the senator-elect who was able to actually win my election to the Florida Senate without support from these entities, that has bullied, frankly, politicians from both sides of the aisle into accepting their position that we will never, ever, ever allow for hotel taxes to be spent on anything other than what the CEOs from tourism want it to be spent on. They want it to be spent on corporate advertising, which they, for some reason, can't pay for themselves. They want it to be spent on their convention center that is used to attract their customers, even though they only employ low-wage workers. We need to be spending it on addressing community needs. Like this is the choice. I feel like it is a binary choice, Dara. Either we can spend our bed tax dollars on things like expanding the Sunrail in Orlando to the airport, or actually having a functioning bus system in Orange County.
Anywhere in Florida.
Or we can spend it on Visit Orlando ads being aired in New York and California, telling people to come visit the theme parks in our state. I want them to visit us too, but they have their own budget for that. We need to be spending these resources on community needs.
Well, that'll be an interesting, I'll be watching that closely. Thank you for sharing that. I learned a little bit about how those bed tax dollars are spent and the restrictions on them. I wanted, so you are known for being a great debater on the floor, in committee and on the floor when you were in the House. Do you think you're going to, are you going to bring that same riz to the Senate, or do you think you're going to have to, you're going to have to tamp it down? What are you thinking? Are you thinking about that? What your persona is going to be?
Well, thank you for the
chamber.
compliment of being a great debater. Some of it is really just the basics. Let's ask questions in committee. How about that? Let's ask smart questions
the bill
of the sponsors let's read the bills. Okay, so that we can fully understand what the impact of these proposals and these laws are. Yes, people supported our Senate campaign in a tremendous and unprecedented way because they know that I will be a champion who asks the right questions and who stands up for Orange County and Orlando's values. And yes, that includes understanding what my mission is as a Democrat in the minority in what will continue to likely be a supermajority chamber in the Florida Senate, at least this cycle, although we have a great opportunity to flip a Senate seat in North Florida as well. We know that we're going to remain in the super minority until we have more opportunities with more seats in the next cycle. And so with that status, it's very important that we hold the majority party accountable by asking those hard questions, by making sure that if they are going to ram through extreme policies that are not in the best interest of Floridians, that they be held accountable for them.
The Orlando area, I wanted to talk about politics. And so the demographics in the Orlando area are changing. I think that's happened over a number of years. There is a House race that was a House seat flipped by Rep. Tom Keene.
That's right.
That's right. That Danny, the new incoming speaker, Perez, told me that's a target for them. They're really going all in on flipping that
that's
seat
obvious.
back.
They were very upset about losing an 11-point DeSantis seat to Democrat Tom Keene,
in a special election, right?
Especially when in that special election, Republican turnout exceeded Democratic turnout, by the way. You heard me right. There were more Republicans that cast ballots than Democrats in that special election. And Tom still won by the percentage that he won, which means we know not only did he get a substantial majority of no party and independent voters to vote for his campaign and his candidacy, but also there was some crossover from disaffected Republicans who see that Tallahassee has become too extreme, and it was time for us to have more parity in the Florida legislature with Democratic representation.
So what's going on? You're on the ground down there. I don't know if you're helping out with what are you doing? Are you helping out with other campaigns? Are you?
Sure, absolutely. When we were running in our Senate campaign until we won without opposition on June 14, we were firing at all cylinders. We had accumulated over 200 or so volunteers over the period of our campaign. We had knocked on over 10,000 doors. Our Senate campaign did since it launched last April. And we were actually knocking on doors 3 times a week before we won without opposition, and always doing it alongside other down ballot races. On Saturdays, we were knocking on doors with Representative Ana V. Escamani running for State House, and also with a local school board candidate, Stephanie Vanos. On Sundays, I was walking and knocking on doors with Representative Tom Keene and his reelection campaign. And also on Wednesday evenings, I was knocking on doors with Nate Douglas, who's running for the part of the House district that I used to represent, House District number 37 in East Orange and Seminole County. All of those down ballot races have overlap with Senate District 17, which I now represent. So we were all working together, and I will continue supporting those candidates in many ways. But to your point, the Orlando community has really evolved and diversified. This is a majority minority community, certainly many more Democratic registered voters and Republicans. Orange County and Orlando has kind of become the new progressive bubble of the state of Florida, if you will. And so, so much of the energy that we're seeing here on the ground in Orlando politically is also being fueled by other local leaders who stand for something. I live in a Senate district where my member of Congress is the first Gen Z member of Congress, Maxwell Alejandro Frost.
He's a rock star.
We have a local state representative, Ana V. Escamani, where, folks are excited in Orlando because they knew that when they saw their ballot, when they see their ballot in November, they were going to get to vote for Maxwell, for Ana, for Carlos. They were going to get to vote to protect abortion rights, Amendment 4, to legalize cannabis for adult use, Amendment 3. I mean, my goodness, these are motivating and energizing issues and candidates that are really going to help turn out the vote in November.
So to that point, voter excitement, you're the first Democrat I've had on the podcast since the debate the other night. And I've been listening to podcast after podcast of, Democratic people much smarter than I am, much more clued into what's going on in Washington than I am. And I don't have to tell you what they're saying. I want to ask you if you think, first of all, do you think President Biden should be the Democratic nominee?
Absolutely. He had a bad debate. It was a terrible debate. Oh my God, it was terrible. But look, the reality is that the best way, we've always known that this is going to be a close election between President Biden and Trump. The best way to relieve anxiety around a high stakes election is taking action. It's volunteering. It's donating time and resources to support not only President Biden's reelection, but other down ballot Democratic races. That's what Democrats need to be doing. That is what is helpful, because ultimately this election is not about Joe Biden. It's about ensuring that we're not plagued with a far right Supreme Court for the rest of our lives. The next president, which could be Donald Trump, if he's sent back to the White House, will possibly appoint not one, not two, but maybe three Supreme Court replacements. Look at Clarence Thomas. Look at Alito. Look at Roberts. These are conservative Supreme Court justices that may retire when the next president is in office. I don't want to be stuck with a right-wing Supreme Court for the rest of my life that is going to attack my freedom to marry, that is going to continue to take away the rights of women to make their own private medical decisions about abortion without government interference, that is going to continue to allow for these extreme policies to go forward. I don't want that. That's why I'm supporting President Biden, because I know that he will stop that from happening, but also he will appoint the right Supreme Court justices that are going to stand for American values and American freedoms.
We hear a lot about sort of a lack of enthusiasm for either candidate, to be honest. Like a lot of the polling I've seen or man on the street things I've seen, and you're probably more familiar with the internal polls than I am. In fact, I'm certain that you are. But lack of enthusiasm at the top, is that going to affect some of the Democrats' chances in Central Florida or elsewhere in Florida of getting elected down ballot?
Well, I think that's why it's so important for us to continue engaging on these down ballot races, because, people often talk about the coattails of the presidential campaigns for down ballot races, but there is a such thing as creating up ballot energy as well.
Is there a name for that? Is there a thing for that? Is it called something? We need to give it a name.
Yeah, there might be a name, and I just don't know what to call it. But
it's like the Marilyn Monroe picture where the wind's blowing up her skirt. Maybe, I don't know. That's the image I get.
Right, but when you have energizing, motivating down ballot races, that can be really, really helpful in turning out the vote. I'm not going to be a conspiracy theorist here, but my election to the Florida Senate is something that we're all celebrating, but it also removes my name from the November ballot. And it removes my campaign's official side ability to execute a voter turnout operation for my candidacy that will lift all boats. So it's not lost on me that my turnout machine, which is a turnout machine that's significant in Orange County, is one that now has to wind down because I'm not on the ballot.
Why can't you use it for other candidates? Can you?
Well, I can write checks and I can make contributions, but there's nothing like the old-fashioned door-knocking volunteer face-to-face operation. So again, I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist here, but our campaign was very successful on every metric, so much so that Republicans and the corporate interests that support them didn't feel like they had a chance of defeating me
So you've
in
been
November with
silenced,
any
essentially.
candidate.
So you've been silenced, and all that energy that you could bring to the ballot silenced along with it.
Oh, well, listen, I didn't become the senator elect by being a slouch. I am the type of Democratic candidate who understands how important it is for me to be out there supporting our down ballot races and supporting our presidential campaign with President Biden's reelection. And so, I'm going to be working hard between now and November to make sure that we're getting that message out to folks and that we're turning out the vote no matter what.
You're a progressive Democrat. Do you think that the progressive label is creating division among Democrats the way that the MAGA label has among Republicans?
I
He's
don't.
making a face.
I
Is
don't.
that a stupid question?
No. I'm just. I'm not sure how to answer that. I'm a tried and true progressive. I stand for progressive values. What does that mean? It means that I care about LGBT rights and gun safety reforms and abortion rights. It means that I want to legalize cannabis for responsible adult use. I believe in criminal justice reform so that minority communities aren't continuing to be basically the victims of incarceration and institutional racism that disproportionately incarcerates people of color. There's so many things that I would identify as being progressive issues, but I think the definition varies from person to person.
Fair
What is
enough.
MAGA? MAGA is I support anything that Donald Trump says
I think that's what
and
MAGA
does,
is.
no matter what. Like progressivism, like we care about issues. We're not idolizing our candidates. There's a reason why there's a lot of there's a reason why there's a lot of hand wringing in the Democratic Party around President Biden's debate performance. It's because we have high standards for our candidates and we care about these issues. We don't just blindly follow leaders because they have a D next to their name, which is what MAGA has become. It's become like this blind obedience to an individual that's not based on any values.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very thoughtful answer. I appreciate that. I've read some about the Pulse Memorial, and I wondered if you could give us sort of a quick update on what the status of that was. I know that things went kind of hanky on that. What's going on with that Pulse Memorial?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, after years of fundraising, the One Pulse Foundation, which was the nonprofit that was created in the wake of the Pulse tragedy, that was whose mission was to create a Pulse memorial and museum. It folded. It folded late last year after failing to meet their fundraising goals and frankly failing to provide the memorial. Now the city of Orlando has purchased the site, the land where the Pulse nightclub tragedy took place, something that we all hoped would happen years ago, but didn't because the owner of Pulse nightclub refused to sell the land and the property early on after the tragedy to the city of Orlando. But now that the city owns the property, now the onus is on them to create a memorial that is respectful and that is a peaceful site where families, survivors, and the community can remember the 49 who were taken and can reflect on this terrible, terrible tragedy. They'll go through a process where they will seek input from those directly impacted by the tragedy to create this memorial. And I'm hopeful that memorial in Orlando will finally come to pass in the next couple of years. Mayor Buddy Dyer of Orlando has stated as his goal that the memorial would be completed before his final term as mayor. He doesn't plan to run for re-election, and so, we're also very, very hopeful that goal can be achieved very soon.
Good luck with that. Thank you for answering that question. Okay, real quick, we're gonna finish it on a little bit of a lighter note. So what's something fun? What's something you do for fun that isn't related to politics?
That's not related to politics.
Yes.
So I am really a huge fan of the arts. Like, that is really something that I've learned to appreciate over these many years. I actually serve on the board of directors at the Orlando Philharmonic Orchestra. And
if you didn't listen to our interview with President Albritton, did you find out something about him that you didn't know?
I found out that he really likes classical music.
Yes, sir. You're welcome. You're welcome for that.
Really, Senator? I didn't know that you liked classical music.
You are very welcome. Yeah.
You see, there's so many things that I think that we could have in common with our Republican colleagues if we only go find out what they are. It's a lot of relationship building. I love the arts. I love theater. I'm a huge supporter of local theater. I'm hoping to go to New York in a couple of weeks with my husband Jarek to see some shows up there. We haven't been to New York together ever as a couple, so I'm really looking forward to seeing some shows while we're out there. I'm a huge fan of the ballet as well. The Orlando Ballet is so amazing. I'm really, really into the arts, and one of the things that I'm really excited about that the Orlando Philharmonic Orchestra has been doing of late is they're hosting a lot of concerts that are companions to films. So it's like a whole concert experience where you go in to see a movie like Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, and you can watch and experience the movie in a theater with a live orchestra performing the score of the film.
I love that.
And in February, the Orlando Philharmonic Orchestra is going to be hosting a Jurassic Park concert where folks are going to be able to watch the film with a live orchestra performing John Williams' famous score. It's just such a great way to bring orchestra to new generations, to bring live orchestra to new generations, because I've already done this for a lot of the Harry Potter movies, and there was recently a screening of Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, with a live orchestra and choir as well at the Dr. Phillips Performing Arts Center, and I'm obsessed with all of this.
I think that's brilliant. I think that's a brilliant way to attract a whole new generation of concert goers, so I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much, Senator-elect, soon to be Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith. Now you are officially a Deeper Dive diva. So thank you very much for chatting with us today. I can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me, Dara. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida, hosted by News Service senior writer Dara Cam and produced by me, Mike Exline. Music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC. To tell us what you'd like to hear, what you've thought about the podcast so far, or even just to mention how awesome we are, we have a new email address and we'd love to hear from you.
That's right. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcasts with an S at e.newsserviceflorida.com. I know it's a mouthful, but it's podcasts with an S at e.newsserviceflorida.com.